All right, so this little presentation is going to be about making an ArcaOS bootable USB stick. And there are a couple of different ways we can do this. The first way is the native OS2 way. And you can do this if you have an OS2 system already by mounting the ArcaOS ISO, which on this machine is mounted as drive I. That's what the ISO content looks like. And go into the AOS boot directory. And in here you'll see you've got a work directory, AOS boot command, and AOS boot txt. AOS boot txt will give you a pretty good overview as to what you need to do in order to create an ArcaOS bootable bootable USB stick, which is that right there. So once you're in the AOS boot directory, you need to point to the drive that has a partition on it, and then point to the ISO, wherever you have the ISO.
You mean the
extracted.
USB stick needs a partition created?
The
ahead of
USB
time?
stick, assuming you don't have a 2 gigabyte USB stick, you need to partition a USB stick. It has to have LVM on it, so you need to use OS2 to partition it. And the partition needs to be less than 2 gigabytes. Why does it need to be less than 2 gigabytes? Because it is a FAT16 file system that's going on it. Because it's a FAT16 file system, 2 gigabytes is our limit. Stay under that slightly, 1800, 1900 megabytes, perfect. So I'm going to insert this one here.
Now, why doesn't this create that for you? I'm just curious. On Windows, I did this on Windows and it created it, I think.
That's the other method. That's
Okay.
this is the native OS2 method.
All right.
The other method, you can also run natively under OS2, and it will create the partition for you and everything. But that creates an image of the partition first, and then you copy the ISO over. This formats FAT16, and then copies everything into the FAT16 directory that are formatted. The other method is probably easier to use, but I'm going to show both methods anyway. I can't see my widget up there, so I'm going to guess that it mounted. Yeah, okay. So that's an AOS. That's a previously made directory. This is a 4 gigabyte stick. It's probably the ugliest USB stick I have. I get clients give them to me all the time, giving with what they think are actual data for me to work with, and really it's just a Windows shortcut to the data that exists somewhere else on the local machine. So I get a stick that's got a whole bunch of .lnk, and they don't even realize that, no, they didn't give me anything. So I inherit these things. I have quite a collection of beaten up USB sticks. They look like they've been in the driveway. They've driven over them a few times. But there is a partition on this. Let's see if I see what the partition is. If I go here, no, wait, sorry, not used to looking at everything this way. There's the stick. It's normally E, but E is on this machine is my DVD. So
Interesting note.
OS2 signed it F. Yeah.
If you make that E, you cannot install ArcaOS to E.
if I make the stick E, I can't install ArcaOS to E. Well, that actually makes sense.
Yeah,
That makes sense, 'cause
okay.
E
I
is
didn't
in
think
use.
of it. You know, when I first made the stick, I didn't think of that, and
That's a good point, though. That's a very good point.
it's just, you know,
The
dumb
stick
user, but.
needs to use a letter that will not be the target of the installation. I wonder if Rich added that to his directions.
I didn't.
I should probably
see it
add
there.
that to the USB stick
The
directions.
stick remembers its drive letter.
LVM.
You can set it up to.
Logical volume manager, we have sticky drive letters.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
You made it.
yeah, the stick will remember, if the,
That's the type of-
any partition media under
You can't
ArcaOS
install ArcaOS
requires
to the
LVM.
drive with that.
So by
Because
default,
it's already, the stick is in use.
an assigned drive letter will stick to it. Now, you can create a partition that does not have an assigned drive letter, and the system will assign a drive letter at that time. This stick was not created with an unassigned drive letter, an asterisk, right? So, in this case, this stick was created as E on another machine, my build machine normally. This trip I decided to travel light. I didn't even take my fat wheeled laptop bag with me this trip. I took that Steal Me ThinkPad case back there, because it's got the big ThinkPad logo on it. Let everyone in the airport know what laptop you're carrying, you know? And I decided I'm taking one laptop. What laptop am I taking? Well, I could have taken the build machine, or I could have taken my production machine. And I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I went back and forth, and I thought, if I take the other machine, then the only thing I have for my email is my cell phone. Not a good idea. So I took my production machine. So this stick was made on the other machine, and E was not an issue on the other machine, so. All right, so there's an existing partition, and you can see the size of it there. What does it say? It's 1798? Is that what it says? Okay. So I have a partition. Whatever you have in that partition is going to get blown away. So do not for a moment think that running this facility is going to very neatly make the stick bootable and save all of your other stuff. You're going to lose whatever's on that stick. So if there's something on it that you want to save, back it up.
Can you create another partition in that unused space? And then
Sure.
It won't be, because
And it won't touch it.
I did it on the 64 gig and I realized I have all the
Yeah,
spaces still.
create another partition there, and it won't touch it. Make sure when you specify the target drive letter, that drive letter is the partition that you want.
That's a good rule of thumb, I think.
You know, it's like the old carpenter's motto.
Measure twice, cut once.
That's right, that's right. So just when you think that you're sure of the drive letter, check again.
We used to have a piece of furniture my brother made, who's a carpenter, and did not do that.
Ah, and it rocked back and forth.
No, somebody didn't get it, that it bit. You gotta make it again.
Okay, so the longest part of this process, yes.
So for your partitioning process, you've
Yeah.
got FAT choice, HPFS, and JFS.
You're gonna partition this for a fat partition.
Right. But if you've got a 64 gig USB,
Yeah.
can you do a 2 gig FAT and a
Sure.
62 gig JFS?
62 gig JFS, 62 gig HPFS you can do, yes.
HPFS, yeah. Okay.
Because HPFS will go up to 64
64
gigs.
gig.
Now, HPFS 386 will go larger than 64 gigs, but we do not support HPFS 386 for a number of reasons. The first reason is the code is very old, and it hasn't been touched since the 1990s. Second reason is we did not license it from IBM, so we can't legally distribute it. Because we can't legally distribute it, ArcaOS does not support it. We only support stuff we can distribute. And we don't support all the stuff that we distribute. Some third-party components we that are supported by other people, we do distribute. IBM will not support HBFS 386. We can't support it, so we tell people, don't run HBFS 386. The only reason I mention that is I actually do get questions about that. People say, why don't you support HBFS 386? Well, because there's JFS, and it's a modern maintained file system. Whether you choose this method or the image, the USB stick image method, the longest part of the process is copying the ISO to the stick. It takes a long time to copy over USB, particularly with our, I shouldn't say particularly with, this has nothing to do with the FAT32 driver, because this is a FAT16 we're talking about. It just takes a long time to copy over 1 gigabyte of data to a USB stick under OS 2. It takes a long time on anything, but particularly under OS 2.
On Windows, it took a while too.
Yeah, it's a lot of data to push through USB. So what I will do is I'm going to let's see. I thought I already had that in there. No. Okay. It's drive F. And the image, the actual ISO itself, not where I'm booted, because I can't use the drive from which I'm booted. That is already mounted. I need to copy the ISO itself. Oops, that was it. Okay. So, again, the AOS boot command, the target drive, and the ISO. And in case you did foul up, you do get an option to say no. How many people say no before they actually hit the Y key? I don't know.
Now, this is copying the ISO?
This is formatting the file system, copying the boot files, and then copying the ISO to an 8.3 file name
Okay.
in the ArcaInst directory. And this
Now,
would take,
I copied that ISO with its original name, that was wrong.
that's wrong.
That was not obvious, okay.
Well, you can't copy a file name that's that long
On
onto a
Windows.
FAT16
On Windows, you can.
because that's not FAT16, that's VFAT.
That's what it created.
If you,
I used your utility to create the partition,
yes,
and it would have also created the file system, true?
if you use the USB stick image
Yes.
utility, you will create a FAT16, an image of a FAT16 file system with the boot files.
Mhm.
And then you have to copy the ISO file to an 8.3 file name in uppercase.
I did, oh, maybe I did do that, maybe the instructions specify that, right, okay, I did read the instructions.
But you could go full on file on Windows because it's running VFAT.
Yeah,
not just
and
that.
VFAT, if you mount it in a Windows machine, Windows will see that file and tell you that that's the file name.
But it'll
But
also
when you
have
put it
that
on
short
OS2,
name.
OS2 will tell you there's no file there.
Or
Right.
it'll truncate it.
It has that funny short file name in Windows.
I don't think,
Doesn't it?
yeah, well, it depends on how you look at it in Windows.
Mhm.
If you look at it from a command prompt, it will probably show you the short file name with the tilde1 on it.
I'll bring the thing down and see what it has.
And if you look at it from the desktop, it will give you the long file name
Mhm.
in VFAT.
Right.
But OS2, ArcaOS, without a VFAT driver, will not give you a short file name.
It doesn't show you that short file name?
Not on a FAT16 volume.
That would be nice.
It will tell you that there is no file there. I don't think it's gonna truncate it automatically, Greg. I think it's gonna tell you that there's no file there, and there is just the the correct remaining space on the drive. In other words, the file becomes invisible. Because there's no facility to read a VFAT file name under the kernel's FAT16 driver. Now, if you're using the NetLabs FAT32 driver and you have the FAT option enabled, it will read the VFAT and give you either the long file name or the tilde 1 file name. But that's not going to do you any good if you're going to boot from this thing and install the operating system, because we don't use the NetLabs FAT32 driver with the.
But maybe you could rename it.
So this is going to take a very, very long time if I let this actually continue. Now, of course, the problem is that breaking out of this is nearly impossible. And it's probably going to result in me having to reboot the machine. Because control break.
This guy will boot a USB stick, this machine?
Yeah, it will. Now, that's an interesting point that you bring up. So before I get out of this completely, let me just cover that issue. Failure of a particular system to boot from a bootable USB stick is not a failure of the USB stick or the process to make the bootable USB stick. It is a condition of that machine booting from that USB stick. Not all machines will boot from a USB stick. Not all machines will boot from every USB stick. And not all machines will boot from a USB stick with a particular operating system on it. How's that for a disclaimer? So the T43 is an interesting animal. If the system is configured to boot from USB first, it will end up in a loop and constantly reboot from the USB stick. So when it goes through phase 1 of the installer, where you make your installation choices, and it starts the file copy, and then it wants to reboot to go into the next part, it will reboot to the stick and start over again. Unless you happen to catch it soon enough and specifically tell it to boot from the hard disk. If you tell it to boot from hard disk first, then you need to specifically stop it before the first boot and tell it to boot from the USB stick. Other systems don't behave that way. The T520, the T530, you put that USB stick in there and it will boot properly from there. There's actually code in the boot sector to make it, when it does the reboot, to look to the hard disk to boot from there, if it should start to boot from the USB stick. But that's not a 100% guarantee on every system. So you need to just be aware that not every machine is going to automatically boot from the device from which you think it should boot. So a USB stick install is not a good choice for an automated, all right, I've made my choices, I can walk away and just let it finish. You need to sit in front of it and watch and let it go. This is going to require some drastic measures. Oh yeah, look at that. Oh, it did shift, okay. It's got to shift video modes again.
Question, Louis?
Mm-hmm.
So your copy of the ISO, are you actually copying the entire contents of ArcaOS?
I am copying the entire ISO, one single file,
Okay.
which I would otherwise burn onto a DVD. I am transferring to the stick. So the stick will have one file in that ArcaInst directory,
Okay.
which is the image of the DVD.
And it
Not
does
the
mount that.
components of the DVD, but the image of the DVD.
So it has something that then mounts that ISO?
It
and then
mounts the
goes
ISO,
from
exactly, exactly. Let's see if I can kill this. What's that, 134? see. Probably took out my desktop when I did that. Nope, okay, good. All right, so when it's done copying the image, do yourself a favor and eject the stick first. Don't reboot the machine with the stick in it, even if you're going to install to that same machine. Because sometimes when it goes down for the reboot, it will corrupt the file system that it just made. And then when it boots up, it's going to give you some weird boot error coming up because the USB stick really needs to have a disk check run on it. So avoid the disk check and eject the thing first. And since I can't see my widget that's up there, I'm going to eject it the old-fashioned way. Okay. All right, so that stick is out. Now the other method to do this, the image method, will work under OS2, Windows, Linux, or Mac. We ship the executables for all the major platforms. Theoretically, it should work under DOS as well, but I've never tried it. So again, I'll go back to my source directory. And in the stick directory, I've unzipped the contents of that package. Now that package, the ArcaOS 503EN USB 2018-08-19.zip file, is available as one of your subscription downloads for ArcaOS. So if you've got a current license for ArcaOS, you can download the latest stick image package. The latest stick image package is going to come it's going to come as a zip. You're going to unzip that to a safe location. And it contains the DFC script. I've already run it once, so that's why this log file is there, so it doesn't really contain the log file. But if you have an issue creating it, we're going to want that log file when you open up a ticket, so watch for that. The image of the stick minus the ISO, an MD5, so you can validate the image if you need to validate the image, and then executables for the DFC engine for Linux, Mac, OS2, and Windows. I guess we don't ship the DOS executable. And a README, which gives you directions for how to perform this magical feat. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount that stick again, and the command here, if I do this, I'm sorry. Note that I didn't update the directions, and I should have, because that should say 503 or say 5.0. But it's the same procedure. So here's the command that we're going to run to create the stick image. And if you're using a different platform, there are directions in here for the other platforms as well.
Do you have to have DFS licensed?
The DFS OEM engine that we ship, ArcaOS is licensed to distribute with any ArcaNoA product. So you're allowed to use this engine for this procedure. That's not a problem. You can use it for other procedures as well with ArcaOS. So you don't need to have a full DFC license.
Mm-hmm.
So what we said before was ArcaOS2 exe. The dash Q is to run quietly and run quietly and run that script. So we run that, and we're going to get a list of disks. And you have to examine the list of the disks carefully to make sure that you're going to select the right one. So disk ID 1, which is physical disk 3 in the system, is 305 gigabytes or 300 gigabytes, 298 gigabytes. I don't think that that's my stick. Disk ID 5, which happens to right now have the label on an ArcaOS stick, but it could have the label of Fred and Ethel, is 3.76 gigabytes, and it's removable. That's a pretty good guess that that's the 4 gigabyte USB stick that I just mounted. So by default, we're going to select that one. But if it's not the correct default, you should say no, and then restart this procedure and specifically enter the disk ID that you want to use. So in other words, if I say no here, I would say dfsan os2-q run aosboot.dfs, and I would enter the disk ID. In this case, it would be 5. So I would tell it specifically to skip trying to find the correct device and install specifically there. Now, why is that? How is that handy? Well, if you have a device that has a 4 gigabyte RAM disk in it, for instance, that RAM disk is going to be in that list, and you don't want to waste your time making an ArcaOS bootable RAM disk and then rebooting and having your RAM disk go into the ether, because that's not going to get you very far. In this case, though, I only have 2 disks, and I know that 5 is the correct one, so I'm going to say yes, continue. And what we've done right now is we have created, and it doesn't matter, this stick could have been completely blank. It could have had 15 partitions on it. It could have been formatted with some completely foreign file system that OS2 doesn't recognize whatsoever. Doesn't even matter, because right now it is completely wiped except for a 1799 megabyte FAT16 partition with LVM on it. Again, heed the advice, eject the stick, reinsert it. Do not skip these 2 steps. Eject the stick, reinsert. The system has to reread the stick now that it has changed fundamentally. The partitioning has changed. So I'm going to eject it again. And then I'm going to reinsert. And I'm going to copy my long file name ISO to arcainst.iso, uppercase. On OS2 it doesn't matter because it's always going to get upcased, but on Windows it will come out in lowercase unless you tell it. Linux the same way, because they both treat FAT16 as case retentive. And that will be a problem because we're not going to be able to boot properly from it if it's in lowercase, oddly enough. So if I just run a quick directory, there's a stick, and you'll notice that the ArcaISO directory is empty. So I need to do a manual copy. I do the manual copy. I'm not going to do the manual copy now because you saw it copying. Watching files copy is like watching paint dry. Everyone's already nodding off after lunch already. I don't need to sing the lullaby. So copy the ISO, again, eject the stick after the copy's been made. Either put it into the machine that's going to be the target for the installation, or reboot this machine. During the reboot, insert the stick so that you can boot off of it. But don't shut down with the stick in it after you've copied the ISO to it. That's the idea. When the stick is broken, it will do all sorts of odd things during boot up. As in, it will tell you that the boot files are corrupt. It can't find something. It's not even going to get to the point of mounting the ISO. When it's broken, it's broken. And when you run a check disk, it's going to find a lot of lost clusters. I go through this on a regular basis. I do all sorts of terrible things to these things that no one should ever do. Just in case someone says to me, this happened when I did this. So now let's see if I can show you what it looks like when it boots off of this thing. Oops. And again, oops, I want to eject this stick. Sorry. And I can do that.
You want one that actually has the ISO on it?
This one does not have the ISO on, so I'm not
You
gonna.
want one that does?
No, I'm not gonna get that far.
You're not gonna overlay or install those?
No, and this is actually pretty good because this will let people know what it looks like when there is no ISO present, when you forget to do that part. Because it would tell you that the ISO can't be mounted. So in this case, I hit F12 so I can get my boot device list and tell it that I want to boot from the USB stick. Come on, come on. Yes, that's the one. From that. So I'm gonna install, maintain ArcaOS. If I want to do, all of this works, all this pre-boot stuff works. If that disk were corrupt, that would not have booted to this point. The boot failure would have occurred at that point when it's unpacking the PF files. That's when it would have happened.
What's the maintain option? Does that allow you to add features you didn't install?
You know, you're the second person to ask me that. We came up with adding that bit to the definition because there is a maintenance mode in here. In other words, when you go to boot options, oops, sorry. I wasn't supposed to do it. I don't know why I did that. The maintenance system, which gives you a graphical desktop with a single OS2 window. You can open
So you
more
can fiddle
OS2
around.
windows. Yeah, exactly.
But it doesn't allow you to like upgrade your,
No, that's not the purpose of it.
Okay.
That's not the purpose of it. Now, that's not to say that when I talk about the ArcaOS roadmap, we'll talk about the update and upgrade options. And we haven't mapped out exactly how we're going to accomplish those goals. It may be one of these boot options from here. The idea is install, maintain ArcaOS means boot off the USB stick or the DVD instead of booting from the hard drive only. That's all that it means. So if I do this and I don't remember that I didn't copy the ISO, this is what's going to happen. No, that's not what's going to happen. But this is what's going to happen. It's going to get right up to the point where it's supposed to mount the ISO, and then it's going to say that the ISO isn't there. And notice this was a stick image from ArcaOS 503 because it's got ACPI 32309. ArcaOS 503.1, the first beta has the .10 ACPI.
Now, could you use that first technique you showed us to create a partition on your hard disk?
Yes.
That would have the same thing, which might
Yes.
be a handy thing.
If you've got 2 gigabytes of free space on your hard drive, you can create a partition in that space and point to that, and as long as that's added to your boot menu and you can boot from it, you can boot from your hard drive and do the installation from there, absolutely. So that's what happens if the ISO can't be found or is missing. Now that may happen for a number of reasons. That may happen because you've got USB 3 in the system. And we can't read the USB stick in order to mount that. Because remember, I've gotten to this point, I've pretty much taken everything that I need off of the root of the USB stick, and I've copied it and unzipped it to a RAM disk. And I've booted off of that RAM disk up to this point. I've loaded the USB drivers, but I need the USB driver active so I can read the ISO off the stick. And if I have a USB 3 controller and not a USB 2 controller in the machine, I'm not going to be able to find the ISO. And I'll get that, just like the ISO's missing. So, the only thing you can do at this point is press a key, and it will shut down the machine momentarily. There you go. That's the only way out. But normally the process works very well. You've got to be patient with the copy. It takes a long time to copy the ISO over. Just because it takes a long time doesn't mean there's anything wrong. It's a lot of data to copy. The ISO takes a while to get there.
You could also put it, well, I guess it's the USB that's the slowness here, right? Not the stick, not
It's-
the media inside the stick.
No, it's the USB 2.0. When we have USB 3, the slowness will probably not be the issue. Now, that said, the FAT16 file system itself is not the fastest file system.
Right.
It's a big file for a FAT16 file system. But USB 3 will definitely improve the throughput of that. The last thing that I want to mention about the USB install, that's a possible gotcha, and it was on my mind and it fell out. What?
You can't mismatch them. I use that installer to install 3.1. It does some interesting things. In other words, the alt boot.
Correct.
The AOS boot has to match.
Yes.
Be the same level as the ISO.
Yeah.
Or because on trying to install the 3.1.
The beta.
It screws up the USB drivers. It mismatches.
Yeah. 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 There's a lot of stuff there's stuff that changes from release to release in the boot configuration. So if you boot, here's what happens. If you create a USB stick using an image for 502 and you put a 503 ISO on that 502 boot image, you are liable to not get a booting ArcaOS install. I mean, if it boots up, it will install from that point. But chances are it may not be able to mount and go through the installation. Because there are things on the installation medium that the installer is expecting to have loaded in memory already. But when you booted with a different version, and those things may not be in memory. Different versions of those files are going to be loaded. The other neat thing about using a USB stick is that if you have a need for a special driver, there is a facility when you boot from DVD to create a supplementary diskette and put your custom drivers on the diskette. How many machines still have diskettes? How many people with machines with diskettes actually have diskettes? How many of those diskettes are still working and usable? The 10-year lifespan thing. So, what you can do is if you are using alt boot and you're using a USB stick, copy your drivers to the root of the USB stick. They will get loaded into memory when the USB stick boots, and they'll be there. So if you have a system that's got a SCSI driver, that's got a SCSI card in it, and that SCSI driver is not shipped with ArcaOS. And by the way, we didn't leave out drivers because we wanted to thumb our noses at people with certain hardware. Believe me. For instance, Broadcom network drivers, native Broadcom drivers, we don't have permission from Broadcom to distribute those drivers. I'm trying to get it again, because there are some older ThinkPads where the multi-Mac Broadcom driver won't work with the hardware properly. Adaptec SCSI drivers. I think we ship some Adaptec drivers. HP ProLiant RAID adapter drivers. We don't have permission from HP to ship those. That's the only reason why they're not included. But if you have the driver, copy it to the root of the USB stick. It will get loaded when it needs to get loaded in the config sys, just like if you inserted it on a supplementary floppy disk during boot. So if you have a machine and it requires, let's say, an update to ACPI or an update to the USB driver in order to work, copy the new ACPI PSD or the new USB driver stack to the root of the USB stick. And those versions will overwrite what we would otherwise be using. And you'll get to use the new version of the driver.
Do some laptops have eSATA connectors?
Some laptops have eSATA connectors.
Now you could, say you had a laptop with USB 3, but you had one of those guys, this would probably work for that also, wouldn't it?
Yes, in general, not in general, specifically, if you have a laptop that has a supported SATA chipset, so the OS2 AHCI driver will run it in native SATA mode, and that eSATA port is connected to that controller, that eSATA port is active all the time. And if you have a device that can connect to that eSATA port, instead of using USB, you can use eSATA to do that. The limitation on eSATA is that, like so many other operating systems, we do not support eSATA hot plugging.
No, but if you, in this case, situation, you can certainly have it plugged in time.
You're going to be booting off of it anyway, so
Yeah,
hot
so-
plugging isn't an issue. And that's the other thing. I would not recommend, while you're installing ArcaOS from a USB stick, that you pull the USB stick. Bad things happen. That is what we call an unsupported operation. Please do not open a ticket. I will tell you this right now. If you open a ticket and say, I was installing ArcaOS, and I pulled my USB stick out, and my ArcaOS installation crashed, David will post a response to that ticket. It's not something you want to read. It will not be a pretty sight. It will not be a pretty sight. So expect that when you have the stick in there, it's going to stay in there for the duration. And when you reboot, remember that if you have one of those machines like the T43 here that will get stuck trying to consistently reboot from the USB stick, you'll need to pull that stick, make sure it boots from the hard drive for phase 2 of the installation, plug the stick in quickly after it starts to boot, so that the ISO is available for it to mount when it boots back up and continues with the installation. Otherwise, it will complain just like it did here that it can't find it. It does not wait forever to find that ISO if it's not there. Any other questions about USB installations? No.
On my machine, basically, it won't really install anything unless you have USB 2 turned on in the BIOS.
Mm-hmm.
But then, once you get to a certain point, it's always, you have to turn that off in order for the OS 2 stuff to work.
You have to turn off USB 2?
Yes, that's in the BIOS. So the timing is an issue for me if I use a USB key compared to a DVD. Would there be like a stop where it would just stop for a moment so I can actually go, should I do this or not? And then go to the BIOS and change, or does it just automatically boot and just continue on? Like, I don't think there's enough time for me to react. That's the issue.
That's a very odd configuration. I haven't seen that particular issue to give you good advice as to how to handle it.
Okay.
Chances are, does the machine have USB 3 in it also?
No,
It doesn't have USB 3,
no.
but the USB 2 support in it is apparently not supported for
Yes,
booting.
For booting, for like, if I use USB 2, I can do all sorts of stuff to get it started the install. But once installed and ready to put stuff on, I have
Mhm.
to turn it off so that it actually works with OS 2 stuff.
So you get through phase 1 of the install, and it copies the beginning files.
Yes,
Then when it reboots, you have to make sure that USB 2 is off.
so that the USB 2 from OS 2 actually comes into play.
So it's not that you need to turn it off so that it specifically doesn't boot from the stick. You need to turn it off so that OS 2 continues to run and is able to access the stick after boot up.
Yes, so that I can actually use the mice and everything, otherwise it just doesn't do anything.
Ah,
My current situation is that version 5.00,
yeah,
I can install that. But then once it's finished installed, the folders are so kind of unstable that once in a while, if you're using anything to, I don't know, like Qt type files, you
Mhm.
can't see any of the folders, they just disappear.
wow.
If I try to install 5.01, 5.02, 5.03,
Mhm.
my issue becomes, oh, you installed to a certain point, everything looks good, and it says you don't have a startable drive. So something's changed between 5.00 and 5.01.
We're out of time for this.
We're out of
session.
time.
Can we
Yeah.
continue this after Greg's
Yeah,
session?
let's-
Cause we have an open slot for this.
Yeah, let's do that. I wanna
Let's
hear
pursue-
more, I wanna hear
yeah,
more about this.
Let's pursue this in another hour.
Yeah.
After
Sounds
Greg's
good.
session.
Thank you for the reminder. I was
Yeah.
going to ask how we were doing on time. This was supposed to be a short presentation.
Yeah. I had a feeling about this one.
It went so much faster when I had slides.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're finished, Liz?
I think so. Who's up next on the
Greg.
schedule?
Great.
Greg.